Hi guys, so we had some issues today with my iPad. Hopefully I'll get them straightened out, but I had to re-record this video for you, so it's just me here pretty much sitting in my room talking to myself. The other kids are gone, but I wanted to go over with you the lesson 2 notes that you were to take yesterday. So chapter 11 lesson 2 notes, if you could get those out for me. We're going to go over those reading check questions and add some more information to your notes. So take a minute, get situated, pencil, notes, and then we'll get started. I'm going to start on page 437 on lesson 2, talking about troubles grow. So the question you were answering was, why did some Americans want to go to war with Great Britain? And the answer to that would be because the British Navy was capturing or imprisoning those American soldiers and forcing them to work on the Britain ships. Okay, and then I would ask you, why were they doing that? Why was Britain doing that to the Americans? Well, Britain was trying to help the Native Americans. The Native Americans needed help because the Americans were moving in on their land, moving in on their territory. Okay, so they were trying to fight back, and Britain was helping with that issue that the Native Americans were having with the American people. Imprisonment was a vocab word, and that was forcing somebody to do work, in this case in the military. Okay, so if you think of impressment or imprisonment, you might kind of remember that word there. All right, so your next question takes us to the War of 1812, and the question, though very basic, was asking about outcomes of the War of 1812. So when I had the conversation with my class, they were giving me things that happened during the War of 1812. And we don't want to know, we do want to know what happened during the War of 1812, but we want to know what was the result, what were the outcomes because of that war. And the outcomes we talked about were nationalism grew, so there was a sense of pride in the country by the Americans. The government felt stronger, more confident in things that they could do. James Monroe announced a new plan called the Monroe Doctrine, and that doctrine let other European countries know that the United States or the Americans were going to fight for their land. They weren't going to just allow you to come over and colonize or settle the lands. They were going to take action and fight against you if you tried to do that. So those were a few of the things we had talked about as far as outcomes of the War of 1812. Let me go back here. I'm going to look at page 438. We have the national anthem started. A lot of them were talking about how the White House was destroyed during this war. A lot of different things happened. So the Battle of Lake Erie was a victory that the United States kept control of the western lands. So some important places, Lake Erie is where a battle had taken place. Washington, D.C. was attacked. They had mentioned that. The First Lady, Dolly Madison, was still at the White House, right, but she escaped. British attacked Baltimore, Maryland, but this city was protected by Fort McHenry. So it mentions a lot of those. Then we have Francis Scott Key, who wrote a poem, and it was eventually put to music, and we call that today the national anthem. All right, back to page 439, extending democracy. The question here was, how did the country's sense of democracy change? So we start to see growth in our nation, okay, not just by land, but by ideas and the way that they're doing things with the government. So here, this section talked about how they started to allow men who not only owned property, but also didn't own property, vote. Where before, you could only vote if you owned property. Now, here in the election of 1828 was the first time all white American men could vote. And we continue to see additions being made to who can and cannot vote as you progress through the government and how it changes and evolves. So that would have been your third question to answer. And the last one is on pages 440 and 441, the Indian Removal Act. You had some vocab words here, assimilated, which means to adopt. You had the Sequoia, okay, a Cherokee named Sequoia, which kind of created an alphabet, so that would have been a person. John Marshall is a Chief Justice. Oh, he was a person. And Van Buren we had talked about, and I'm going to come back to some of those people here after we answer this question. Why did the journey west by the Cherokee and other tribes become known as the Trail of Tears? So if you read there those last couple of paragraphs, the Trail of Tears was named that because many of the Native Americans that took that trail or attempted to take that trail had died because it was a long, treacherous, challenging trail to get to where they were being forced to go. Which brings me to my next question. Why were they moving west? Well, as I just mentioned, they were being forced. We had that Indian Removal Act signed by President Jackson, who was forcing the Cherokee and other tribes to leave their lands. Remember, the Americans are continuing to move west, taking over lands. So he was signing this act to force them to go to a certain Indian territory instead of just staying where they were at. And then we have Van Buren, who forces that act by sending the military out and forcing the Cherokee to leave their land and move into the Indian Territory west, which then gets us to the Trail of Tears. So we had talked about that there's a lot of cause and effect in this particular lesson. We see that a war started, some things happened during that war, but resulted in nationalism and a sense of confidence in the government, okay, and they continue to kind of build and change things. Then we get to the Indian Removal Act. Well, that sense of confidence makes them force Native Americans to leave their land. Okay, we had one president sign it, we have one president that's enforcing it, which results then in the Trail of Tears and many of those Native Americans passing away.